Hello, everybody. I am here with the Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. And with us today, we have Matthew and Paul from Ecowatt DAC, and we are going to talk about green energy, climate change, renewable energy, and all these things that we hear so much about in the news. And we have Matthew. Paul, first of all, before we get started, tell everybody where they can connect with you, where they can find you, and I will put all the links in the description box down below. Paul first, then Matthew. Paul, where can people find you?
Okay, so traditionally, like everybody else, you can find me on LinkedIn, Paul Flynn Ecowatt, or the Green Asset Portfolio. So very, very easy to link up with me there. I'm the brownest Paul Flynn you'll find on LinkedIn. Also, www.ecowatt.io. That's our project website. All announcement, news, podcasts like this will be linked there, and you get all the information you could need.
Matthew.
We also have a Telegram channel, right, Paul?
Yes, Telegram channel
and Facebook as well, I think.
Okay, so we'll put Telegram super. Facebook, we won't promote Facebook. We'll promote Telegram. We'll have that link down below. So let's jump into it. This is a hot topic. A lot of talk about climate change. A lot of talk about renewable energy. Tesla, the hottest company around. Everyone talks about Tesla, and everyone wants a Tesla, and they feel like they're saving the planet when they purchase and they buy a Tesla. So Alexander, hot topic. A lot of people talk about it. It stirs up a lot of emotion as well. Let's jump into it with Paul and Matthew. The floor is yours, Alexander, and let's have a good discussion on this.
And it's becoming a very, very big topic in many countries, with all the big powers now utterly committed to it. Russia is now starting for the first time. They resisted this very much, but they're talking about electric car production. They're starting their serial production this autumn of their first electric cars. They're talking about becoming a major hydrogen supplier. And there's lots of talk about blue hydrogen, a topic about which I know absolutely nothing, and which Paul and Matthew can explain to us what it is, because I'm not very sure I understand it. And of course, China has been very big also in climate science. And when I was in China a couple of years ago, I was absolutely astonished at how many electric cars I saw there, and electric vehicles generally, and the extent to which the Chinese authorities, with, I should say, a lot of popular backing, seem to take climate issues extremely seriously. And of course, in China in particular, it's also seen as a means to reduce the terrible pollution that you find in China's big cities, which is every bit as bad as they say it is, having actually been there. At least it was when I was there. They say it's got better, partly because of these moves that are being done to move towards a more renewable, more pollution-free type of energy. But of course, there's lots of people around the world who are both skeptical of climate issues and about climate change. I know a mathematician and scientist in France who is constantly bombarding me with long documents and articles about why this isn't really something to be concerned about. And there are other people who feel the same way. And, I'm not saying, she's right or anything like that, but that's what she does. And and of course, there's also very strong resistance on the part of some people towards making this kind of transition. And in France, it's important to say that the political protests in France that we call the Gilets jaunes began with a push by the French government to force people away from diesel cars, which had been heavily promoted previously. And we see in Britain how in London, for example, the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is trying to push everybody who lives in central London, as I do, towards either electric or hybrid cars, or electric or hybrid cars. And there's going to be very steep charges if you run a diesel car coming in this October. And the British government itself has got a very ambitious target to convert us, or at least large parts of us, to carbon-free technologies. Conventionally powered cars supposed to be phased out apart from hybrids by 2030. Hybrids are to be replaced by electric cars by 2035. And I think I'm right in saying that the British government's target is complete carbon neutrality, carbon zero, by I think it's 2040. It was 2050, but they've advanced it by 10 years. It's not very long. That's not a very long time to do that. And you hear lots of people grumbling and saying that this is simply impractical, that's going to cost too much, that people's living standards are going to fall, all of those things. So that's an introduction. That's a general introduction as I see the situation. But we now have two people with us who are working on the coalface, if one could put it like that. That's a rather perhaps inappropriate metaphor. But anyway, they are directly involved in the nuts and bolts of all of this. They understand the renewable energy business in the ways that we can't, because we're outsiders. So they can explain to us exactly what's going to happen and how it's all looking. And perhaps the first thing we're going to focus on are the huge inconsistencies between what the government's target and what they want to do and what's actually happening. And one particular point that I think we might want to address is the way in which renewable energy targets are being pursued all seem to be very big projects, favoring big companies, favoring big corporations. That might not be the right way to go. In fact, it might be the least efficient way to go. But of course, it is the way that makes some people an awful lot of money. So over to Paul and Matthew, and perhaps after that introduction, maybe you could both provide us with some idea of the kind of structure of the renewable energy industry and how it works, and what some of these anomalies are.
Okay. Well, if I may start, first of all, pleasure to be here, and thanks for giving us the platform. It's great. You hit the nail on the head, actually, in your last paragraph when you said that renewable energy is now the go-to for banks, private equity firms, asset management companies, and the like. Because the way that renewable energy is structured for the large part is through what we call a feed-in tariff or a feed-in premium, which is basically means that your price of the energy that you sell to the grid is underwritten by a state. So you've effectively got you've basically got a government bond, which is guaranteeing the payment, of the X amount, the price per kilowatt hour. So, of course, this is very, very attractive. It's attractive to banks, and it's attractive to large corporations and private equity firms. However, what we're trying to do is get people directly involved in investing in that pipeline of assets. So we're giving people the opportunity to invest rather than corporations. I think ultimately, from a political point of view, people drive change, not governments. Do politicians really care about the environment? I think that's one question. Or do they care about getting re-elected and public opinion? So I think it is an issue. I think the broad consensus is that renewable energy helps. Unfortunately, at this point, it doesn't really provide baseload power, which is a general issue. So you tend to get peaks and troughs in performance. But there are technologies developing out there that can give baseload power. And we're also going to be looking at those. But I think as it stands at the moment, you have the big boys playing in that market and nobody else. And it has been designed as such, because a bank will only lend you around a 70% LTV, which means you still need the 30% equity. Now, you can own 200 acres of land for a solar farm, but where would you get that type of investment? You're talking about huge numbers, and it has been designed specifically for that. So unless you want to put solar on your roof as an individual, you just cannot participate in this market. And it's quite a good market to participate in. Paul, have you got any additional thoughts?
I'd like to jump in there and maybe just start with the headline, and we can break it down. So what we do, so I've been building renewable energy projects for more than 15 years across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Matthew has been financing projects like this for even longer than I've been building these type of projects. And we've done it for large corporations, for banks. We built green bonds and smaller type projects for rural electrification. Now, the big challenge you said is it's the big boys that are playing with it. And inefficiency often happens when governments make broad policies. So I do have to defend wind turbines and renewable technology in general. For example, the average wind turbine today, how ugly it might be, if you see it, they in Europe, they're hitting a 2 megawatt average. That means when you see that thing turn, the wind turbine is supplying 5,000 people with electricity. One wind turbine. And you see lots of wind turbines as you're driving through the countryside. So they're really, really good at producing clean energy. The challenge that is there is because the way the tariffs are made, it incentivizes large corporations and states to all decide at the same time, we want to become an energy exporter. So using Germany as an example, Germany has 16 states as a federal government, and each state is 100% energy independent in terms of renewable energy, and they all are set up to export energy. The problem is when the sun shines, it shines everywhere. So Germany at any given point throws away 10% of its electricity. And I'm sure in Greece it's the same for solar. On a weekend, when everybody's at work, the sun is shining and nobody's using solar energy. And on weekends, up to 80% of solar energy is thrown away. And that's the problem. So it was incentivized for large projects to do, and we want to change it and bring it down for the average man to be able to participate in small projects that are close to the point of consumption and, like a good suit, tailored to the actual demand that exists. And when that inefficiency is cut away, that's when we'll truly become green.
So what sort of small projects are you thinking about? I mean, if we're not going to have giant projects, of course, governments love giant projects. I mean, they give a wonderful opportunity for the minister to come along, and there'll be a big event, and they'll be able to open it, and they can spend large amounts of money, and they can go on television during an election, and they say we are spending X amount of money on doing green projects. And of course, if you are appealing to a certain constituency, and it's a very big constituency now, if you build, that's all very attractive and very successful, and from an electoral and political point of view. But what would you suggest is a more viable project, a more practical project, a project that might be more effective, cost effective, more successful for people?
Yeah. So it's already starting. For example, looking at solar, which is the most accessible. All the big solar farms are owned by large utilities and family offices and so forth. Inaccessible. And now people are putting money they're incentivized now to put solar onto their roof for their own consumption. And for solar, that's the key. I personally believe solar is more of an energy efficiency tool rather than energy production tool. And that's where lots of the incentives are going. So there should be projects and maybe bonds that incentivize new builds to build with solar as part of the plan from the very beginning, or older builds to have a technical revision and then put solar, whenever a roof needs to be repaired, add solar into the mix. So it reduces the consumption of electricity. And for wind in Europe, I mean, a lot of that, we're already past that stage now. Wind is already everywhere. You can't turn back the clock. And as I say, hindsight is always 2020. But there are new technologies coming out now. Like you said, hydrogen. Hydrogen is and heat to power technologies like organic ranking cycle. These are ways of taking waste energy and turning that into a new form of storage. So every time you pass an industrial chimney with heat coming out, that heat can be captured using hydrogen electrolysis, converted to hydrogen, and now you have a fuel. And that's something inert that you can keep like a battery for days or weeks or months, because electricity as a battery storage isn't the most efficient way to store it. You all know mobile phones. Mobile phones are the most efficient battery on the planet at this point of time. And you know how your phone performs after a year or maybe 2 years. Your battery is just not usable. So right now, I don't see yet how electric cars can drive for a decade or more in order to really bring down their carbon footprint. Because a dirty secret of the electricity industry, I believe it has to happen, but the incentives are wrong. Again, right now, the carbon footprint of an electric car as it leaves the production line has a 7-year higher carbon footprint than an electric car, than a diesel or fuel car, which means you need to drive your electric vehicle for 7 years just to break even in terms of carbon footprint. And I don't see electric cars driving for 7 years yet without replacing a battery, which sets you back to zero. Yeah.
Can you explain this? Is this all related to the battery or to the entire production process? I say that because, of course, you meet all kinds of people here in London who buy electric cars, which are, by the way, expensive cars. I mean, relatively speaking, and they do this, because they feel either that they're doing something good for the environment, or because they feel that, they're being virtuous, or that they want a virtue signal, or whatever you want to call it. But they are all convinced that these are somehow more carbon friendly, more ecological, more attractive cars to own than conventionally powered cars. And yet it seems from what you just said that that's absolutely not the case. And that, in fact, you're basically shifting the problem from the emissions of the car itself to someplace else. Exactly. Is it the mining, the lithium mining, that is causing the trouble?
I say it's terrible, the lithium mining, terrible.
It's lithium mining. It's primarily most of the carbon footprint and also ecological damage, high use of water. All of that is in the battery. Now, in fairness to somebody like Tesla, in their last presentation, they were highly focused on reducing the size and carbon footprint of the battery. So they themselves have realized what's happened. But so it is, and that's that kind of innovation that needs to be driven and incentivized, not the political waving the flag in London and say all cars are that's a political statement that doesn't take the entire pipeline into consideration. Now, China, I'd like to add this one thing, because that's a thought, because that's a problem in Europe, that like to say all the big tech companies are in America right now. All that to use the cliche. China has a model, and right now in China, they say every week a new electricity vehicle company is coming onto the market. Every week, a new company is launching, where Europe is focusing on a Tesla and maybe the Ford electric vehicle and the Toyota electric vehicle, but also the big businesses. And Europe has to go back to innovation and driving actual technology in the efficiency space and ignore all the big headlines. People need to do the work.
Yeah. So essentially what you're basically saying is that it's ultimately, it should be a market-driven solution, because if you have a kind of centrally planned, I'm being a bit loose here, but if you have a sort of system where government comes along, says everybody has to have electric cars by 2035, because that's what the British government is saying, and that privileges certain big producers, which is what we're also looking at. Actually, you're not actually doing anything to help the climate at all, or ecologic. You're just creating more problems than in fact you're solving. Whereas if you have the kind of situation which we had in Europe and in North America at the beginning of the 20th century, where you had large numbers of people making cars at that time, all of them in competition with each other, all of them refining, developing engines, being excited with the new technology, thinking of the way that it works, you will not only get a product that is actually better in the end and one closer to people, but one which is actually more ecologically friendly than this imposed solution that comes from above. Well, that makes complete sense to me, I have to say. That is exactly how it would look. But you yourself said, both of you, that the entire business structure at the moment favors big corporate things in the West. So how do you change this? Do you change the tax system? Do you change the banking financial system? That's a huge challenge to do. And of course, that goes beyond the question of green technologies. It also goes towards, the whole nature of our economic system today. Everything about the way the economic system functions suggests, on the contrary, a drift towards centralization, I would say, with more wealth being concentrated, more technological power, information being concentrated. How do you break that up? What proposals can one make? What can one do?
Yeah, it is challenging, but it is possible. I mean, it's true. For example, I mean, if you talk about centralization, like there's a Facebook, there's an Amazon, there's a Microsoft. So there's one Coca-Cola. Yes, there's a Pepsi, but beyond that, there's nothing. So the world just seems to be a natural law that strives for these monoliths within the market. And the electricity market is the same. All the big leaders are the established technology companies, Siemens or General Electric, which are 100 years old. The new big tech oligarchs out of the United States, who threw lots of government grants, and then no one is paying taxes, and they have billions. You can't compete with that. Now, one big change, and might be radical, and that's what we're doing right now, is that we, for example, in a project we're doing that's also focused on social impact and renewable energy, we're using the blockchain to circumnavigate traditional banking systems. We're not doing anything. When people hear blockchain, they think of things like crypto and Bitcoin and different types of clever or less clever solutions. But if you think about blockchain as a solution of what it actually is, it's a way of creating trust between two parties that don't know each other. By recording contracts, you don't need a notary, you don't need any witnesses. You have a smart contract that is recorded on a public ledger that guarantees relationships. And if you give me 20 seconds, I'm sure you all have a life insurance. Yeah. How does the life insurance work? You go and pay your insurance broker. Say, I now have a life insurance. I'm going to pay in every month for the rest of my life until I retire. This insurance broker is part of a big company. There's a commission structure there already. The insurance company usually pays a big bond or some investment bond structure, like a fund, hedge fund, to manage their capital. These guys give it to an asset manager. And this asset manager now holds government bonds, ETF stocks, like a NASDAQ, for example, and something lots of people don't know, that's why I use life insurances. A lot of life insurance positions are in renewable energy assets. Because as Matthew said earlier, renewable energy projects have a government guaranteed income for like 20 years. So it's like holding government bond. So you as an individual have no chance. So you have all these middlemen taking money. Yeah. Now imagine if you could take that same money, skip all the middlemen, and have a direct stake in a renewable energy asset. And that's something that blockchain makes possible. So where your insurance now says, oh, you get 2-3% of your life, which barely breaks inflation. Yeah. And they don't even guarantee that anymore. Just by cutting out the middlemen, you're at 8 to 10% compounded every year. And that's not because the project got better. It's because the middlemen are gone. And having the blockchain, which records these projects and records these contracts, you don't need the middlemen anymore. And I think that's the real value of the blockchain. Another topic people are talking about, and we're launching a project to test this and put our money where our mouth is and launch a project like that and make people rich, hopefully.
Gosh, okay. Wow. So in effect, it's a decentralized, market-driven, personal model against a top-down, centralized model, which is the one that has dominated up to now. And blockchain is a key technology because, you come back to hydrogen. I mean, can I just say, one of the interesting things about hydrogen is the way that is already now becoming a big project because we've been talking a lot about Nord Stream 2 on our programs, a subject which I've exhausted myself talking about because because of the politics of it. But one of the things about Nord Stream 2, which people don't know about, is that it's going to be piping gas for the moment, but it's actually designed to pipe hydrogen.
Yes.
Because that is the real thing. That is, both the Germans and the Russians, but we're talking about state entities. That's what they see. So it's another big, giant, multi-billion-dollar project which is going to be used to create a green energy future, or so we are told. But what you're saying is that kind of project that we are talking about really isn't really the way forward. It's not just that kind of big top-down project is really seeing its time limited, because with blockchain is going to drive all this away. It's going to create systems which are going to be much more decentralized and out of government control. How do you work your things now? I mean, you say that Matthew was saying that you were able to invest money in these projects, these green projects today, which basically bypass the government structures. How does that work? What are you able to do now? Because, of course, blockchain is only very much at its beginnings.
Yes.
In effect, somebody can literally buy a token, and each token is the equivalent to 1 watt of grid-connected power, green power specifically in this case. What that means is, typically people have only ever had certain ways of investing. You can invest through the stock market. You can do an ISA, which gives you no return. Used to be able to get premium bonds, Alexander. I don't know if you remember those.
I remember them very well.
Well, those little nuggets. So basically, you had 2 choices. You either took some risk to get a decent return, at which point you were subject to a lot of market volatility, like stock markets. And traditionally, people haven't done that well on stock markets. Or you had the safe route, which basically gave you no return at all. So we're trying to structure something that gives people a better return with virtually no volatility. And the volatility, the zero volatility effect is underpinned by the fact that we have long-term revenue underpinned by a government guarantee. And people can buy that directly. No middlemen, no nothing. They can go to the website, they can go here, and they can buy a token.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So in a way, just saying that, governments are doing this in order to create big projects, but in fact, people can come in and actually find ways of using it for themselves. That's because they're giving this guaranteed funding, but it can actually be tapped into without having to go through Tesla or Siemens or one of these big companies.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
You have to kind of break it down as to what the government is really doing. So, is the government paying for anything? No, it's not. Is it helping you get funding? No, it's not. All the government is doing is guaranteeing a price, and even that in some countries has now disappeared. That's all the government are doing. So it's not costing the government anything. The person that actually foots the bill for the energy itself is the grid operator. So in Germany, for instance, it could be Vestnetz, for instance. So Vestnetz would pay you for your kilowatt hours produced. The German people and most people in Europe, actually part of their electricity bill is what you call a green energy tax.
Yeah.
So that physically pays for the green energy production. So actually governments, they're not kicking in any real money at all. This is simply an illusion. By the same token, they're quite happy to stand on the top of a hill waving a massive green flag.
Yeah. And to add, I think you do need both. So if you think of the electricity grid, if you imagine a river, and you're an electricity consumer, so every day you go with a bucket and you take a bucket.
All right, Paul, we lost you for a brief second, so you ended up in a new position here on the screen. But continue with your point, Paul.
Okay, thank you. So I was just about to explain how the electricity market works and the payment, because it's very simple. So if you imagine the electricity grid in any nation, this is true around the world, as a river. And as a consumer, you're going to that river and you're taking out a bucket of water, That's your electricity consumption. Now, the grid operator, the state, usually, what they want to make sure is that this river never dries. So somewhere there's an electricity provider and they have a well. That's their electricity production. And they take out a bucket of water and pour it into the river. And then they send you an invoice. And this is why you're able to change your electricity provider every other day if you want to. And it's no problem. The electricity in your plug doesn't change because it's just a river. And the rest is pure accounting. So the way the feed-in tariffs work, as Matthew just said, is the government isn't paying anything. It's the consumer that's paying. So a part of the price you pay for your bucket of water contains the tax, which is then paid to the guy who takes the water out of the well to refill it. And what the government does, it guarantees that for 20 years, you're going to get a fixed price. And that's because those projects are so big and inefficient, or that's why they attract huge conglomerates and political decisions to build huge facilities. But what we need is the small ones on the spot. And I'd like to say something about hydrogen in a moment, but I'll give the spot back to you.
No, I think I'm very curious to hear about hydrogen, because hydrogen is what everybody seems to be talking about. Hydrogen seems to be, the talk is that it's going to be the new energy in the future. By the way, I was even reading recently somewhere that it's going to be powering submarines. So I mean, they're even talking about submarine-powered, hydrogen-powered military submarines. So it's all this is the new technology, the new energy product. I mean, I don't understand. I'm not being a technological person, I couldn't understand how it would work. But perhaps you can explain to us a bit about hydrogen and what that technology is all about. I mean, the one thing that everybody seems to be agreed about is that there is no shortage of hydrogen in the world. I mean, there is. No. So, I mean, the amount of hydrogen is massive. But tell us a bit more about this.
Okay. I mean, hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. So we won't run out of it for sure. So, I mean, hydrogen is half of water, H2O. H2 is hydrogen. So, so as you produce it, it's a flammable fuel. So like petrol, how does petrol move your car? Put it in a car, it goes to the engine, it ignites in the motor. There's a small explosion and it moves an engine, and now your car is moving. Or a diesel generator for electricity, it creates energy into movement. Now, so hydrogen fuel works the same way, not quite as efficient as petrol or diesel, but in principle, it's the same thing. It's a fuel, which means you can also store it for a long, long time. The exciting thing is that you can produce hydrogen fuel from water. And that's the exciting, clean thing. And what people are doing right now is they're using waste energy to use electrolysis to split H2O, so water. They split H2 into hydrogen, H2 and O2, which is just water. It's just oxygen. So the byproduct is oxygen, and now you have hydrogen. And when you then flame it off to use it for fuel, the byproduct from that is water. So it's a perfect circle. So the question is, you hear things like gray hydrogen and green hydrogen, but that just refers to the production method of how you make it. They were saying, we say electric car is great. Production of the battery, not so great. So we, for example, right now, we are together with a technology partner in Germany. We're building a hydrogen plant to support a factory that uses a lot of steam in Romania. Now, these guys produce 20 tons of steam per hour. We only need 300 kilograms of steam to produce a megawatt worth of hydrogen fuel. And that megawatt, again, if you do the circle, that's enough power to supply 2,500 people with electricity. Yeah, and that's just from a waste product. So it's crazy expensive to build, but those are so the incentives from the government have to be to bring down the price of that technology, but they need to support innovation companies like ourselves and others who drive innovation alongside the Teslas and all the big ones. And then they need to incentivize consumers like you to have access to that technology, or even better, have access to all the revenue streams that are generated by it. Because that's where we're all cut off. We have no access to the revenue streams. They're all there, but they need to become accessible to us. That's the secret.
Right, interesting. So it looks to me as if we are talking ultimately not just about energy and clean energy, we're talking about economic models. We're talking about an economic model, which is the one that is being pursued by governments, actively encouraged by certain people in a certain Swiss resort, which we're not perhaps going to name, which is all about centralization, control, top-down economics and whatever. And that seems to be inefficient. At least we have inefficiencies at many multiple levels, but even on this issue of green energy that they're talking about so much, it's inefficient, and we can see the inefficiencies, and there are inefficiencies that exist at every level. And then we have different approaches which are decentralized, market-driven, enterprise-driven, individualist, tailored to people, tailored to specific needs, and which will be operated through other new technologies like blockchain and new financial architecture and new structures. And it seems to me that this is part of the big, perhaps the main struggle that's going on in the world today is between these two different models. It all basically connects. Somebody, a very great man, once said that everything is connected, and we just see how. And the big question is, which one of the two is going to win through? Well, I put my money absolutely, always, on this model that you're describing, because it seems to me that when you look at history, when you look at the bigger perspective, it's always the decentralized, people-driven models that win out in the end. So I think at that point we're going to wrap up. I think we've covered the main ideas. Perhaps in future programs we can look at some of the more detailed ideas and projects that you're coming up with, and you can also explain to us as we progress and do more programs how things are shaping out, and how particular pieces of news, like, dare I say it, Nord Stream 2, how all that fits into all of this. Nord Stream 2, I'm sorry, I should say, is a particular bugbear of mine, because I'm being asked about it all the time. And but, you know, we can move on, and we can talk about perhaps more interesting things too. So can I thank you both, Paul and Matthew? And perhaps we can just ask you again where viewers can find you and where you are.
Okay.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very, very much. I hope to follow this in the future. So for everybody who's interested, you can find all the updates on our project on www.ecowatt.io. But we're also across all social media. Just Google for our names, Paul Flynn, Matthew Edwards. We're in Telegram. We're just shy of 50,000 followers there right now. All people who are whitelisted to join our project venture, and just see if the people can better the banks. And we're on all the other classical social medias too. We have a Discord with over 20,000 people. We're trying to exchange ideas, because that's what the world is these days, a marketplace of ideas. So let's continue that conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Alex. And you, Alexander.
Thank you.
Thank you, both of you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.